Welcome back, Legends. There are a lot of controversial cars in Asphalt Legends. Every few years, the community finds a new car to complain about. We've seen the Corvette Grand Sport era. We survived the Huracan EVO meta. We watched people rage over Devel users, SF90 players, and every single multiplayer season that turned into complete chaos. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, has ever reached the same level of hatred as one specific car. The Vanda Electrics Dendrobium. A car so hated that people literally changed the way they talked about multiplayer because of it. A car that created endless arguments between manual and TouchDrive players. A car that somehow managed to stay relevant for years and years without ever truly disappearing from the meta. At one point, people stopped calling the game Asphalt Legends. They started calling it Vanda Legends. If you played multiplayer during the peak Vanda era, you already know exactly why. This thing feels illegal. The handling feels bugged. The acceleration recovery makes mistakes meaningless. And then there's the hidden Blue Nitro mechanic that completely ignores the normal rules of physics in the game. You can slam walls, you can spin people out, you can drive terribly, and somehow, the Vanda still survives. Meanwhile, someone driving a high-skill hypercar perfectly can lose because one Vanda parked itself in the middle of the road like a moving refrigerator. That's why today I'm going all the way back through the history of this car. How it started, why nobody cared about it at launch, how players discovered its broken mechanics, and how it slowly transformed into the single most hated car Asphalt Legends has ever seen. And trust me, this story gets worse the deep we go. Before I continue, if you guys enjoy these deep dive Asphalt Legends videos, make sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel. And I want to know your opinion too. What car do you think is the most toxic car in Asphalt history? Is it still the Vanda? Or does another car deserve that crown now? Let me know in the comments. The real life story, the flower that never bloomed. Now here's the crazy part. The Vanda wasn't created by Ferrari. It wasn't created by Lamborghini, not Porsche, not Bugatti. This car came from a small Singapore-based electric mobility company called Vanda Electrics. And back in 2017, this thing completely shocked the automotive world when it appeared at the Geneva Motor Show. The car looked futuristic even by concept car standards. Sharp lines, aggressive proportions, and one of the wildest door systems ever made. The name Dendrobium actually comes from a flower, a genus of orchids native to Singapore. And to honor that, the entire roof and door system was engineered to open in synchronization like a blooming flower. That sounds cool now. But back then, people were absolutely losing their minds over this design. And the craziest part is, this wasn't just some random fantasy concept with fake performance numbers. The project actually had serious engineering behind it. The car was reportedly connected with engineering support from people associated with Formula One technology development. On paper, the Dendrobium looked like it could become one of the craziest electric hypercars ever made. But then reality hit. Funding problems, restructuring attempts, delays, financial pressure. The project slowly started collapsing behind the scenes. The company tried moving operations into the UK to continue development, but eventually the dream just faded away. The Dendrobium never truly entered full-scale production. In real life, this car became a ghost, a forgotten concept car trapped in automotive history. But then Gameloft decided to resurrect it inside Asphalt Legends. I don't think anybody at the time realized they were about to unleash one of the most controversial multiplayer cars ever created. The launch, the Era of Irrelevance. When the Vanda first arrived in Asphalt Legends during the King of the Fall update in late 2019, the reaction was surprisingly quiet. And I know that sounds impossible now because today the Vanda feels like one of the most recognizable cars in the game. But players didn't care about the Vanda much when it first arrived, because during that era of Asphalt Legends, top speed was king. The Class A meta was dominated by monsters like the Pagani Huayra BC and the Genti Accolone. Cars that could absolutely fly on long tracks. Then the Vanda shows up with a lower top speed, weird proportions, stats that most players overlooked because of its relatively low top speed. People thought it was a joke. Some players literally mocked its appearance because unlocking new cars back then required massive token spending or brutal special event grinding. Most casual players didn't even bother trying to get it. For almost an entire year, the Vanda basically lived inside whale garages. Barely used, barely talked about, barely respected. But then something happened. As more players started reaching higher garage levels, more people slowly unlocked the car. And once players actually started testing it properly in multiplayer, everything changed. The Blue Nitro secret. This right here is where the Vanda stopped being a forgotten car and became a problem, because players discovered something completely ridiculous about its mechanics. Now, normally in Asphalt Legends, Blue Nitro, or Perfect Nitro, is mainly used for maintaining speed efficiently, especially on rough terrain or technical sections. If you want maximum speed, you use Shockwave or any other nitro or nitro brake tricks. That's how the game works for almost every car, except the Vanda apparently didn't get the memo. For some reason, the Vanda has this hidden Blue Nitro behavior, where activating Perfect Nitro actually gives the car extra speed. Not just efficiency, extra speed. And suddenly players realized this car could consistently hit around 363 kilometers per hour while using Blue Nitro. That completely changed everything. Because now you had a car with ridiculous handling, insane drift radius, elite nitro efficiency, instant acceleration recovery, and artificial speed boosting. That combination created an absolute multiplayer nightmare. The main problem with the Vanda is its extremely high nitro efficiency. Even with Perfect Nitro, you can maintain it for a long time. On top of that, Perfect Nitro gives players higher top speed and makes it easier to knock down opponents. Because Shockwave drains your nitro bar so fast and can't even be activated until your tank is completely full, Perfect Nitro has basically become another powerful nitro state that can still knock down opponents easily in multiplayer. Tracks like Osaka, Caribbean, Buenos Aires, and Tuscany became Vanda playgrounds. The car could just glide through corners without losing momentum. Meanwhile, faster cars had to fight the track constantly just to stay stable. And then came the recovery acceleration. This is probably one of the most frustrating parts about racing against the Vanda. Normally, when you make a mistake in Asphalt Legends, you get punished hard. But the Vanda, basically, you can mess up a turn, bounce off something, get hit by another player, and 2 seconds later, the car is already back at speed again, like nothing happened. It removed punishment from driving. And once players realized that, the hatred truly began. The manual versus TouchDrive War. This is where the Vanda stopped being just a strong car and became one of the most controversial vehicles in Asphalt Legends history, because the Vanda created a massive civil war inside the community. Manual players versus TouchDrive players, and honestly, this argument lasted for years. Now, if you're a manual player, you already know how much effort manual driving actually takes in Asphalt Legends. People spend hundreds and hundreds of hours mastering advanced mechanics, floaty drifts, punch drifting, wall riding, speed management, nitro control, perfect route optimization, drift cancel timing, airspeed preservation. Especially with high-speed, low-handling cars, every single movement matters. One bad drift, you lose speed. One tiny mistake, the entire race can collapse instantly. That's what makes manual driving rewarding. You improve slowly over time. You earn your speed through skill and consistency. Meanwhile, the Vanda came into multiplayer and basically ignored half of those rules. The handling was so absurdly stable that the car almost felt glued to the road. Sharp corners suddenly became effortless. Tight sections became easy. Recovery became instant. Mistakes barely mattered anymore. And because of that, the Vanda quickly became known as one of the most touch-drive-friendly cars ever released in Class A. You could literally drive relaxed and still remain competitive. That's what made so many manual players furious. Imagine this situation. You're sweating in a difficult high-speed car, managing every drift perfectly, trying your hardest not to lose momentum. Then suddenly, a Vanda casually takes the inside corner with almost zero effort and passes you. That feeling drove people insane, because to many competitive players, it felt like the Vanda rewarded lazy driving while punishing players who spent years mastering difficult mechanics. The real nightmare didn't even start there, because eventually manual players themselves started using the Vanda too, and that completely changed the game. At first, people mainly blamed TouchDrive users for the Vanda meta. The car became famous as the TD King because average players could suddenly compete far above their normal skill level. But once experienced manual drivers realized how broken the Vanda actually was, everything escalated. Now you weren't fighting against TouchDrive players anymore. You were fighting against skilled manual players using one of the most forgiving and stable cars ever created. And that combination became terrifying. A skilled manual Vanda player can optimize every drift perfectly, maintain momentum through impossible corners, abuse the insane handling to its absolute limit, recover instantly after mistakes, take ultra-tight racing lines, and play aggressively without fear of punishment. At that point, the Vanda transforms into something completely different. It stops being just an easy car. It becomes a fully optimized multiplayer weapon. Especially on technical tracks, a strong manual Vanda player becomes unbelievably difficult to beat. And that's when the community frustration truly exploded. Because now the car was dominating both sides of the player base. TouchDrive players loved it because it allowed them to finally compete against stronger opponents. Manual players started abusing it because they realized it was simply too efficient not to use. And this created one of the biggest identity crises Asphalt Legends multiplayer has ever seen. To elite manual players, the Vanda represented everything wrong with the game. Low risk, low punishment, extreme forgiveness, insane reward for minimal effort. But to casual players, the Vanda became their savior. Finally, there was a car capable of surviving multiplayer chaos without requiring years of mechanical mastery. That's why this debate never truly ended. One side sees the Vanda as a talentless crutch that lowered the skill ceiling of multiplayer. The other side sees it as the ultimate equalizer that gave average players a fighting chance. And somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, the Vanda became immortal. And that's why this debate never truly ended. The Rise of Vandalism. Then Gameloft accidentally created one of the biggest multiplayer disasters in Asphalt Legends history. Because over time, the Vanda became easier and easier to obtain. First, it entered the Legend store at Garage Level 16. Then later, the showroom system arrived. Then came different special events, then various multiplayer rewards, and eventually even spotlight events and permanent progression systems started giving players easier access to Vanda blueprints and epics. At that point, maxing the Vanda no longer felt impossible. Even free-to-play players slowly started building gold max Vandas without spending massive amounts of tokens. And that's when the real nightmare began. The Vanda stopped being a rare luxury car. It became a worldwide infection. Every multiplayer lobby suddenly looked identical. Vanda, 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 another Vanda, and somehow, even more Vandas. The community eventually created a name for this situation: vandalism. And honestly, that name perfectly described what happened to Class A multiplayer. Because the Vanda completely destroyed variety. Instead of seeing unique races with different driving styles and different car choices, lobbies became flooded with the exact same car over and over again. But the scariest part is this: the Vanda's actual multiplayer performance feels way stronger than what its rank suggests. Compared to many higher-ranked Class A and even some S-Class cars, the Vanda performs unbelievably well in real multiplayer chaos. Its combination of handling, acceleration recovery, Blue Nitro abuse, and stability allows it to destroy opponents far more easily than people expect from a 4,099 ranked car. And that created one of the biggest balancing frustrations in the game, because players would bring faster, more expensive, higher-ranked cars into multiplayer, only to get bullied by a Vanda taking corners effortlessly while recovering mistakes instantly. That's why people started calling the game Vanda Legends. The car didn't just become popular, it completely took over multiplayer. The Toxic Playstyle. The Vanda doesn't lose speed easily during collisions, and players abuse that hard. People started using the car like an armored tank. 360 spam became incredibly common. Vanda users would throw random ground spins constantly because even if they failed, the recovery acceleration would save them instantly. Meanwhile, the other player gets knocked down and loses the entire race. Then came park blocking. This might be one of the most annoying strategies in Asphalt history. On narrow technical tracks, Vanda players would intentionally sit in the middle of tight sections using Blue Nitro, Faster cars behind couldn't pass properly. You'd have an S-Class hypercar with way more speed, but the Vanda would basically become a moving wall. That's what made the car feel so toxic psychologically. Not only was it easy to drive, it actively punished aggressive skilled driving. The Overclock Disaster. Just when players thought the Vanda meta was finally slowing down, Gameloft introduced Overclock, and this update basically poured gasoline directly onto the fire. Now for older, weaker cars, Overclock was a cool idea. It helped keep some forgotten vehicles relevant again. But putting the Vanda on the Overclock list? That was catastrophic. A normal golden Vanda sits around rank 4099, but Overclock pushed it all the way up to around 4308, and that completely broke matchmaking balance. Now the Vanda wasn't just easy to drive, it was statistically overpowering too. Casual players suddenly had even more speed, more stability, and more forgiveness. Meanwhile, manual players were sitting there wondering why they even bothered mastering difficult cars anymore. The Overclock Vanda became what many players called the anti-nerf. No matter what happened to the meta, no matter how many new cars released, no matter how much power creep entered the game, the Vanda survived again and again and again. The ultimate nightmare, the EVO Tuning Threat. But as terrifying as a 4308 Overclock Vanda sounds, there is a much bigger, much darker cloud looming over the horizon, and it involves the game's newest, most controversial performance feature, EVO Tuning. When Gameloft rolled out EVO Tuning, it was originally supposed to breathe new life into older cars that had slowly fallen out of the meta. Instead, it completely threw multiplayer balance out the window. We've already seen exactly what this feature is capable of with the Ferrari SF90 Stradale. By unlocking its drivetrain and engine EVO parts, the SF90 EVO transformed into an agile floaty monster with arguably one of the most toxic acceleration systems in the entire game. And immediately, the car became heavily spammed across high-tier multiplayer. Now everyone is asking one terrifying question. What happens if Gameloft gives the Vanda an EVO tune? Because that could completely destroy Class A multiplayer. Right now, the Vanda's only real balancing weakness is its mediocre top speed. But imagine if EVO tuning suddenly boosts that weakness away. Imagine higher top speed, even stronger acceleration, more nitro efficiency, even faster recovery. At that point, multiplayer wouldn't even feel competitive anymore. An EVO-tuned Vanda would turn Class A into a permanent war zone where skill matters less than who owns the strongest tuned Vanda. That possibility genuinely scares a huge part of the community. The Unkillable Equalizer. Over the years, Gameloft clearly tried introducing Vanda killers. Cars like the Lamborghini Countach LPI 804 showed up with amazing handling and competitive stats. New elite Class A cars arrived constantly. But here's the problem. Multiplayer isn't played on spreadsheets, it's played in chaos. Real multiplayer races include traffic, knockdowns, bad connections, accidental bumps, wall taps, pressure, dirty driving, random moments. And in chaotic environments, the Vanda thrives. Because the car forgives mistakes better than almost anything else in the game. That's why it never disappears. You can create technically stronger cars, you can add faster cars, you can add more elite cars, but unless those cars match the Vanda's forgiveness factor, the average player will still choose the easier option. That's the real reason this car became immortal. Final thoughts. The Vanda Electrics. Dendrobium feels like one of the biggest accidents in Asphalt Legends history. Not because the car was intentionally designed to destroy multiplayer, but because every single part of its mechanics somehow combined together into the perfect storm. The hidden Blue Nitro boost, the absurd handling, the instant recovery acceleration, the stability, the collision resistance, the forgiveness factor. All of it created a car that completely changed the way multiplayer works. And over time, the situation only became worse. The Vanda started appearing in more events, reruns, Legend Store rotations, showroom access, and spotlight-style systems, which allowed more and more players to max it out easily. Suddenly, the car wasn't rare anymore. It became unavoidable. That's when vandalism truly began. But what makes the Vanda so controversial isn't just the car itself. It's what the car represents. For casual TouchDrive players, the Vanda became a lifesaver, a vehicle capable of surviving multiplayer chaos without demanding years of difficult manual practice. But for competitive players, especially experienced manual drivers, the Vanda represented the complete opposite of what skill-based racing should feel like. And the biggest twist of all? Even manual players eventually started abusing the Vanda themselves because they realized how insanely effective it was. That's what pushed the car into legendary status. Once elite manual drivers started mastering a vehicle that was already incredibly forgiving, multiplayer became an absolute nightmare. Suddenly, you weren't just fighting against an easy car anymore. You were fighting against skilled players using one of the most stable and broken platforms ever created in the game. Then came Overclock, then EVO Tuning Threat, and somehow, after all these years, the Vanda still survives every meta shift thrown at it. Gameloft introduced faster cars, stronger cars, more advanced cars, and even supposed Vanda killers. Yet the Vanda keeps returning because real multiplayer isn't played on spreadsheets. Multiplayer is chaos. And in that chaos, the Vanda thrives better than almost anything else in Asphalt Legends. Love it or hate it, this car became more than just another multiplayer meta. It became a symbol of the endless battle between accessibility and skill inside competitive gaming. I truly believe no car in Asphalt history has ever left a bigger impact on multiplayer culture than the Vanda. That's going to be it for this video, Legends. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the history of Asphalt's most hated car, make sure to leave a like and share the video with your friends. And honestly, I really want to know your experience with the Vanda over the years. Did you hate racing against it? Or were you one of the players using it to survive multiplayer chaos? Drop your stories down below. Don't forget to subscribe, Legends. See you on the track.